Shar Communications is proud to present this 5-tape series on Hasidic Masters by Rabbi Berel Wein, an educational project of the Destiny Foundation. This is the 4th tape in the series, number 791, entitled Rabbi Simcha Bunim. We hope you enjoy.
I want to, at the outset, mention the fact that someone pointed out to me in my description of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. I left the impression that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was driven out of Barditchev. He was driven out of 3 rabbinic positions before Barditchev because of the fact that he was a chassid and the Misnagdim conspired against him. But in Barditchev he found a home. He never was driven out. He remained there for the balance of his life. And that in fact in Barditchev after his death, he was so highly respected that the community never took another rabbi officially. They had an Av Bezdin, they had someone to paskin, etc., but there never was another rabbi in Barditchev after Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. Tonight's topic is one of the most fascinating, interesting, different people in Jewish history. Really an unlikely candidate Rabbeim in Poland. And that's Rabbi Simcha Bunim Banihart, who was born in 1765 to a great Misnagdic family. And his father, Reb Tzvi, was a well-known Talmid Chacham. He was a great orator, and therefore he was one of the leading Magidim in northern Poland. And he was well known to all the great Rabbonim. We have a letter that the Noda B'Yehuda wrote to him just full of praise as to his wisdom, his erudition, his Talmudic knowledge, and his ability to inspire people whom he spoke to and to bring them closer to Judaism, etc., etc. And his father had wanderlust in him. I guess that comes with the territory of being a Magid. The Magidim could never make a living, could never, with the exception if you were a Magid in one great city such as Vilna, then perhaps you could stay put. But most of the Magidim were itinerant preachers. They went from place to place, from town to town, and spoke, and they were paid a fee, or they collected, the hat was passed after the drosha. I have found always, in my experience, that you're much better off if the hat is passed before the drosha. And that's how they made a living. And his father, who was a Magid, traveled all of his life. And a little of the wanderlust that the father had, he put into the son, because he would always describe the places that he had seen, the different countries. He traveled as far as Moravia, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. He didn't stay only in Poland. And he therefore a breadth of view into the home, which was something that certainly was not usual in most Eastern European Jewish families. Most Eastern European Jews never went more than 10 or 15 kilometers outside their town, their village, with the exception of traveling to the Rebbe once a year or something like that. But there was nowhere to go, and you couldn't go, and there was no money to go, and therefore people didn't go. But he came from a family of travelers, Reb Simcha Bunim. Reb Simcha Bunim's mother was descended from great Yichus. She was descended from Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, the Bach, one of the great Talmidei Chachomim of the late 16th, early 17th centuries. And he was raised by his father. Even though he had siblings, he was raised by his father as a special child because of the fact that from his earliest days on, he showed enormous intellect, curiosity, and he was not a regular child. Like, he didn't play, but he would invent mathematical problems and try and solve them. And he had always had a bent, tremendous bent for curiosity, for the world around him. He had a collection of bugs, insects, and he studied each one of them. Things that, again, were certainly not the norm in Eastern European 18th century Jewish homes, that a child would behave that way. His father allowed no pilpul, he only direct, simple analysis, deep thinking, and he learned with his father and in the local cheder until he was 10. When he was 10 years old, his father sent him to Hungary to study in what was then the greatest yeshiva in Europe, probably, the yeshiva in Mattersdorf. Mattersdorf was and is a famous community in the Jewish world. The Chassam Sofer, before he became the Rav in Pressburg, in Bratislava, was the Rav in Mattersdorf. And it was an ancient Jewish community. It was a wealthy Jewish community, unlike the Jewish communities of Poland and Lithuania. The Jews in Moravia, in Czechoslovakia, in Bohemia, in Hungary, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire were under much better economic and social conditions than were the Jews under the Poles and under the Russians. And in Mattersdorf, there was a great Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yirmiyah was his name. Now, everyone knows the Lithuanian yeshivas have subsumed, they've absorbed everything. So that when one thinks of yeshivas, you can't think that there was ever a yeshiva outside of Volozhin or Mir or Slobodka or any of the other Lithuanian yeshivas. But the yeshiva in Mattersdorf, under Rabbi Yirmiyah, produced hundreds and hundreds of great people. And he had a great influence on his students. And he was an intimate friend of Rabbi Simcha Bunim's father. And it seems that Rabbi Simcha Bunim's father, in his wanderings, in his Magidus, got as far as Mattersdorf. And therefore, he wrote regarding his son the words that the Torah says regarding Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe's mother, V'lo yochla od hatzpino, in the house, and therefore she had to take him out to the Nile River. So he wrote to Rabbi Yirmiyah that even though Rabbi Simcha Bunim is only 10 years old, but lo yochol od lahatzpino, I can't hide him anymore, I can't teach him anymore. And there's nobody in this shtetl that can teach him. And therefore, even though when you send a 10-year-old child to the yeshiva undertakes a great responsibility. So he said, even though I'm laying this responsibility on you, I want you to know I'm sending you a special student, and I ask you to please take care of it. He stayed in Mattersdorf till he was bar mitzvah. When he was 13, so again, it's not our 13. I mean, it's 13 in terms of chronological age, but it's not, it's not our 13-year-old. For whatever reasons, generally in the world, in the 18th century, you aged much earlier. And in the Jewish world, that also was true. And I mentioned to you that many times the Yid HaKodesh got married when he was 14. It was common to be married by the time one was 16. So therefore, a 13-year-old should not be viewed in the same perspective as we view 13-year-olds today. So when he was 13 years old, he left Mattersdorf and he traveled to Nikolsburg. Nikolsburg was a famous ancient Jewish community that was connected to, again, to Prussia, to Poland, to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was a crossroads. It was a very, very important Jewish community. It had as its Rosh Yeshiva, the famous Reb Shmelke, one of the original founders of Hasidus. When he came to Nikolsburg, the Rav and the Rosh Yeshiva was, again, a fascinating person. We have many Sforim for Mordechai Banet, and his Perushim to the Talmud are published in the back of the Vilna Shas. Now, Reb Mordechai Bennett, together with the Chassam Sofer, were the strongest opponents of reform, because reform existed in Central Europe, and it was very strong. By the end of the 18th century, it was very strong. And he was a bitter opponent of reform. But he was a different type of person. He was not a controversial person, enormously tolerant. He was a misnagid who never said a word about Chassidus, even though he himself was not a fan of it. And he had what we would call today a secular education. He was a gifted mathematician. He was a linguist. He knew German. He knew Latin. He knew some French. He knew science very well. And he knew philosophy. He knew the Moreh Nevuchim of the Rambam by heart, the Kuzari, and he taught in the yeshiva these subjects. Aside from the great Gaon that he was, the great Talmid Chacham that he was one of the great men of the generation, and he loved the Hebrew language. And on Shabbat, for instance, he only spoke Hebrew, and he demanded that his students only speak Hebrew back to him. And he was a great Baal Digduk, a Hebrew grammarian. And we have books of his that survive from his library. Some of them, in fact, are an exhibition in the Jewish Museum in Prague. And in the margins are a whole list of great books written by great rabbis. And he would mark, there's a famous story that the Marshal was like that also, Reb Shlomo Luria. So Marshal wrote to his nephew, the Ramah, he said, Ato mankiv schorim umazkir nekevis. He said, you have like a sex change, right? He said, you make the males female and the females males, because the Ramah did not write Hebrew with the exactitude that the Marshal expected. And he wrote him a long, it's printed in the Tshuvas, the Tshuva of the Ramah and the Tshuvas of the Marshal. He wrote him a long letter, chastising for the lack of grammar. But you should know that Talmudic Jews and grammar don't mix, usually, for whatever reason. We're very lax in it. It's not something to be proud of, but it's just the way it is. And therefore, anyone that was proficient in grammar, in Digduk, was an exception to the rule. There's a famous story about the Netziv was a great Baal Digduk also, and that a maskil came to him once and he said, how come the rabbis don't know Digduk? So the Netziv said, there's a halacha in the Gemara that says, Korah, if you read Kriya Shema, v'lo Digdik, but you don't read it correctly, Yotza, you're Yotze anyway. But he says, nowhere does it say Digdik v'lo Korah, that you're Yotze. And he said, the Maskilim are Digdik, but v'lo Korah, that you're certainly not Yotze. So, but Reb Mordechai Bennett was a great linguist, and he was a great linguist in Hebrew. He was also a great Baal Chesed. The stories about his help for people are legendary, to the extent that he almost didn't exist. He only existed to teach, and he gave his children the same secular education, and taught them philosophy, and he taught them German, and he was a great influence on Rabbi Simcha Bunim. And Rabbi Simcha Bunim saw in him a role model. And as we'll see, Rabbi Simcha Bunim will be a great linguist. He will know all of the modern European languages. Again, for Chassidic Rebbe, that's exceptional. So you have all of these people, Simcha Bunim's father, the Magid, and Rabbi Yirmiyah Rosh Yeshiva in Mattersdorf, and Rabbi Mordechai Banet, all of them were misnagdim. He had an uncle that was a chassid. His mother's brother, who lived in Warsaw, was a chassid. And the process then, we're talking, in the late 1700s, the process was that if Chassidim saw somebody that had great potential, great talent, they wooed him. They went after him. They wanted to win him to their cause. And that's why they were so successful in attracting, as I mentioned over the past few weeks, they attract the best minds and the most dynamic people who lived in Poland at that time. The young people all gravitated to Hasidus. And part of the reason was that they were recruited. Whereas the Misnagdim always had an attitude, which you can see today also. You're like, who needs you? They're like, we're in good shape without you. And that difference in attitude reflected itself in the attitude that the young had towards Hasidus, because they felt, and correctly so, that they were wanted. They were absolutely wooed. People wanted them to become Hasidim. So the uncle went after him and went after him and went after him. And Rabbi Simcha Bunim wrote a letter to his father why he became a chassid. A very fascinating insight. And the insight is as follows. He said, I was in Hungary, I was in Czechoslovakia, reform is sweeping the decks. The old yeshivas will not be able to stop reform. The misnagdim will not be able to stop reform. And reform will take over the Jewish people, and he correctly said that if reform does take over the Jewish people, within 3 generations the Jewish people in Europe will disappear. He said the only effective movement is Chassidus, because Chassidus put an emphasis on the young, Chassidus revitalized Judaism, Chassidus gave a different vision of life. It could stand up to reform. And therefore he said that it's, so to speak, the order of the day to build up Chassidus. Because if Chassidus will be built up, then it'll be an effective buffer in Eastern Europe against the ravages of reform. Now we can debate the matter, because a great deal of the Chassidim eventually became, the children of the Chassidim became socialists and communists and secularists. I mean, everybody that you see here in the country came from somebody. Ben Gurion's grandfather went to the Rebbe, to the Chortgever Rebbe on every yontif. So he wasn't born, Ben Gurion did not come from a long line of socialists. And everybody in Meretz also did not come from a long line of left-leaning liberals. They all came from traditional, mostly Hasidic homes. So whether Hasidus would be able to stem the tide is a matter that can be debated either way. But that was his rationale. That was his rationale. And therefore, when he returned to Poland, he returned married. He married a woman. So usually somebody with a mind like that, from the yeshivas, etc., does what's known, quote, a rich shidduch, unquote. Right, that someone promises to support him for the rest of his life, and then the someone never comes through. But those are the promises. Right? That's the illusion, at least. But he married, he received no promises. He never, also one of the differences between him and the others. And he really was a very self-made man. Until he became a Rebbe, he was a very wealthy man, as we will see. Once he became a Rebbe, he gave it all up. And in fact, he preached poverty from that point onwards. But until he became a Rebbe, he was a self-made person. So when he came back to Poland, his uncle brought him to Reb Moshe Leib Sasover, the great Rebbe that, again, I discussed last week with the Yira Kodesh. And then he brought him to the Maggid of Koznitz, the Koznitzer Maggid. The Koznitzer Maggid was so impressed with Rabbi Simcha Bunim, he said, when he walks in the room, Ruach HaKodesh walks in the room. He was rarely as impressed with someone. And he asked Rabbi Simcha Bunim, come and learn, etc. Rabbi Simcha Bunim says, I can't afford, right? He said, I learn, right? He said, his not learning is more than all of our learning put together. But he said he has to make a living. So the Maggid of Koznitz was very close. I mentioned this also in a previous lecture. He was very close with the richest Jew in Poland, Shmuel Zawitkover, who had enormous contacts in the Polish government, and the contacts always lead to contracts. And, and he had tremendous patents, rights from the Polish government, and he was a multi-millionaire, the richest Jew. Many people criticized him, but the Koznitzer Maggid was makar of him. He went out of his way to keep close with him. Shmuel had a son, Berko Bergson. You've heard of the philosopher Henry Bergson. Henry Bergson is a great Bergson. Why his name was Bergson and his father's name was Yud, that's not a problem in Poland. And Berko Bergson married a woman, Tamar, that the Chassidim called Tamaraleh. And she's one of the most famous women of Chassidus, because she single-handedly was the greatest financial supporter of Chassidus in the late 1700s and early 1800s. And to a great extent, without her support and without the protection that her support afforded the Chassidish Rebbeim from the Polish government, Chassidus would have had a very, very rough time surviving. What she did was, whenever the Maggid of Koznitz sent somebody to her, she gave that person a job, according to the talents that the person had. And the Maggid sent Rabbi Simcha Bunim to Berko and Tamar, with a letter from the Maggid saying that here's an outstanding young man, a gon, a holy man, a chassid. He has no way to make a living. Take him on. So many times it's charity, right? If people send you, you're always wary when somebody's doing you a favor, right? They send you, somebody that you should give him the job. If he's so good, why doesn't he give him the job? But here, she immediately was able to fathom that she had a diamond in the rough here, that this wasn't a charity case. So he began by being the bookkeeper for their real estate enterprises in Warsaw. And he taught himself accountancy. He was so good, and she was so impressed by him, that they made him the manager of their lumber and timber concession, which was an enormous business. To cut down trees and float it on the river up to Danzig, and in Danzig it was loaded on ships and sent for export all over the world. And in a world of wood, it was a tremendous, tremendous business. And therefore, she had him move to Danzig. A Polish Chassidish Jew to move to Danzig is like, there was a rabbinic training program that I'm still loosely affiliated with in the United States. We place young states, new communities that don't have any Orthodox synagogue. Many of them don't have any synagogue whatsoever. And so an opportunity arose in Las Vegas. And we couldn't get anybody to go to Las Vegas. We couldn't get anybody, even though there was a wonderful nucleus and there was money there, and we just couldn't do it until we hit upon the idea that we changed the name of the town. There's Las something or other, one of the Spanish names, that's the neighborhood, and to there, everybody's willing to go, right? But how are you going to go to Las Vegas? And today, Baruch Hashem, in Las Vegas, there are a number of Orthodox congregations, and there's a wonderful rabbi there by the name of Wein, no relation, who really has done a great deal, and there are hundreds of Shomer Shabbos families now in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is one of the biggest boom cities in the United States generally. So to tell a Jew to go to Danzig was like telling them to go to Las Vegas. Nobody goes to Danzig. If you go to Danzig, it means that's it, you lost it. And he went to Danzig. Not only did he go to Danzig, he went to all the fairs in Leipzig, and wherever the business was conducted. He wore short clothes. He didn't wear long garments. He wore a short business suit. He dressed like a European. White shirt with string tie, just like the people of his time. Worse than that, he went to the theater. He went to concerts. Worse than that, he played cards on a regular basis. Chassidim said later that when the people that he played cards with always became Baalei Tshuva. They probably lost, which always helps to make you a Baalei Tshuva. It was shocking behavior for a person such as that. But he was his own man. He was, all of his life, he was his own man. He really didn't care what anybody said. He was just immune to all of that. He taught himself German. He spoke fluent German. He spoke French. He spoke Polish. He spoke Russian. And he was a man of the world in every respect. He was so interesting that even later when he came back to Poland and he would visit, for instance, at the Chozel of Lublin, he would come in a suit. All the Chassidim came in the Chassidic garb, he would come in a suit. They had a fit. The Rebbe was Makarovin. Because the Rebbe said, Rabbi Simcha Bunim, the great men saw in him. But the people saw in him, how could he let him sit at the Rebbe's table? He's wearing a suit. And then they heard the rumors, he goes to the theater. And he plays cards. And he was an inveterate pipe smoker, a lilke. He had a collection of different pipes. And he didn't have a big beard. We have a portrait of him in the National Museum in Warsaw. I don't know if it's still there. But before the war, there are two portraits that are legitimate. One is Rabbi Simcha Bunim, and the other is of the Chidushei Orim, that somehow in their lifetime they were painted. And, you see him with a very trimmed beard. Not the stereotype picture that you have of a Chassidish Rebbe. And then he taught himself pharmacy, pharmacological science. He taught himself to be a pharmacist. Now in Poland, he was the only licensed Jewish pharmacist in Poland. Passed all the exams.
This is the end of